When organizations face poor web performance, challenges building modern applications at scale, or need to reduce operational and development costs, they turn to Fastly. Fastly's distributed edge network means your business can unleash its growth potential without worrying about scaling your infrastructure, whether for growth of users, transaction volume, or geographic expansion. Get the speed, security, and edge cloud innovation you need to deliver profitable and engaging experiences. Visit securityweekly.com/Fastly for more information or to speak to an expert. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their 2023 RSA Conference full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place April 24th through 27th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2023 and use the code 53UCyber. That's 53, the letter U, Cyber. We hope to see you there. And I will be there. I'll be doing some interviews for Security Weekly, and I'll be there all week. I'll be there from Sunday through Friday, so definitely hit me up if you want to say hello. All right, so last week we talked with Josh Corman about the White House's national cybersecurity strategy, and this week we're continuing that conversation with Donald Fischer about the impact on organizations building with open source, which was certainly something that the strategy touched on. Donald is the CEO and co-founder of Tidelift, an organization focused on securing open source software. He was previously in the investor world at both General Catalyst and Greylock. He has also been an executive at Lightbend and, very appropriately for this conversation, Red Hat. Welcome to the show, Donald.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for letting me join.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. This is I like getting the conversation close together, where we kind of have this ongoing discussion about. I think initially when I saw the White House cybersecurity strategy, I was a little bit nonplussed. I thought, okay, this is a good recognition of what's going on right now, what has been going on. Like we've made some good progress. I feel like CISA's done some good stuff. We've I felt like we were finally getting to a point where the government was starting to get it, or at least we had people in the U.S. government who were starting to get it. And then, I think Josh Corman made me realize, maybe this was a bit more impactful than I was giving it credit when we had him on last week. So yeah, I'm excited to continue this discussion because I don't think we've touched on the open source piece of this as much.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed last week's episode. I thought there was a really great dive onto some of the broad areas impacted by the national cybersecurity strategy, including around critical infrastructure and so on. But yeah, my focus is mostly on the application development part, and particularly the, as you say, the open source software element of all of this. And there's considerable impact, we think, coming out of the new strategy that's going to impact folks that are building open source software, people that are building with open source software, which is most people building software applications these days.
Yeah, and there's always been that question hanging out that I think, as is typical, an XKCD article perfectly puts when they show the building blocks and the tiny piece near the bottom. That's just a single open source maintainer that if that part's removed, the whole thing collapses. And that's what I think of. I think of that comic every time I think about this problem of, who's making sure that single maintainer of this critical package didn't just sell it to a cybercrime enterprise, or hasn't just what happens if they just give up on it and they stop maintaining it. It's the level of dependence we have on open source combined with the lack of a plan to ensure that open source is safe and secure and supported. It gives me some anxiety.
Yeah, I think rightfully so. And the XKCD, I was glad to hear that comic reference the famous XKCD dependencies comic that shows all of modern digital infrastructure sitting atop a random package that somebody's been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. And it's funny, but it's also true. One of the funny things about that cartoon is that it understates the problem, because so many applications don't depend on just one dependency like that, one under-maintained or overlooked dependency. Most applications depend on thousands of them, right? And we've seen through recent events, like what happened with the incidents around the Log4Shell episode just over a year ago, the profound impact that can have on application teams that are building with open source. So, for me, I think it's really, the key question is one of incentives. How are we going to design this in a way so that we're not just all winging it and hoping for the best, but how can we create some of the right behaviors and mechanisms to align the creators and users of open source software? And on that point, I'm very optimistic. I think that there's a lot of room for innovative approaches here, doing my best to help contribute some energy there with the work that we're doing at Tidelift. And I think that my take on the U.S. government efforts here is, I think they're pretty well designed, and I've been really impressed. I think it's refreshed my personal confidence in the technical capabilities and the ability for the U.S. government to access technical talent who gets it and can help design policies that are going to make sense in the long run here. But a lot to talk through in terms of what's actually being required and what are the parts that we still need some building to figure out.
Yeah, so let's I guess let's start at the scope, because I think we've seen things in the past that were pretty impressive in how forward-looking they were and what they covered, but they were, specifically for organizations selling to U.S. government agencies, right? And so the scope was a bit smaller, and we expected the impact of that to be a bit smaller. I think that's M2218, maybe.
Yeah, I call
so
it
what are we talking about?
M2218. It rolls off the tongue. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are we talking about here? What's the, with this strategy, or, is the scope everybody? Is it private and public, or, are we still, what we're going to see in the short term, is it still going to be specifically addressing organizations selling to the U.S. government?
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting and important elements of the new U.S. national cybersecurity strategy, is that it expands the conversation here. So, that M2218 memo that you're referring to, that came out in September of 2022, and that was put forth by the Office of Management and Budget, sort of the part of the White House, that puts requirements on executive branch agencies. And the M2218 memo, it was helpful because it made things more concrete. It got into some more details, building on some of the activities that started with the May 2021 presidential order on executive order on cybersecurity. So that M2218, it said, hey, organizations that are supplying U.S. government agencies are now going to need to meet some new requirements. They're going to need to, among other things, provide a software bill of materials, the notorious SBOM acronym, that just defines what are the ingredients that are going into this software. And that OMB guidance, M2218, required suppliers to the U.S. government to self-attest that they are following secure software development practices. And the definition of those secure software development practices is a big PDF document that was compiled by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that's called the NIST Secure Software Development Framework. And it's a pretty comprehensive and pretty reasonable broad set of considerations to take into account when building any software. So that was all before the National Cybersecurity Strategy was released. Now, what the National Cybersecurity Strategy has done is to expand the scope of folks who need to be paying attention to things like the NIST Secure Software Development Framework to really not just organizations that are supplying the government, as you say, but any organization providing services using software in the US. And the key mechanism for that is a shift in how cybersecurity liability is going to work. And the cybersecurity strategy document goes into some detail about how they envision this happening. Historically, most of us are familiar with the liability regime in software being it's all risk is borne by the end user. Right. Yeah. All those big caps paragraphs when you click through the license agreement, no warranties expressed or implied. And that's been convenient for software makers, but that's not how it works in other key industries, right? So, you look at automotive industries, the steering wheel comes off your Tesla while you're driving down the highway. It's a pretty big problem for Tesla. It's not buyer beware. And in pharmaceuticals, if there's a contamination in a manufacturing line, that's going to be an issue that the manufacturer needs to contend with. They're going to bear some of the liability for that, or they're going to expressly bear the liability for that. It just hasn't been the regime in software. But one of the key takeaways from the National Cybersecurity Strategy is that is now the policy of the current administration, is they want to shift liability to organizations that are producing software.
And I always wondered when that age would come. So we used to get, I remember me and my ex-boss and good friend Wendy Nather getting interviewed about exactly this nearly 10 years ago at RSA. And Wendy's prediction, I think back then, was we would just have to see more deaths, because your comparisons there are comparisons where human safety, comes into the conversation. And we might be kind of getting to that point with IoT. We had Grace on from the IOXT Alliance a couple weeks ago, a couple episodes ago. And, I just saw in the news there's a company who makes garage door openers and alarm systems and stuff like that, and all easily defeatable. And the company's not responding to the researcher. So, just a classic IoT problem, but with something that secures your house and keeps your doors closed. So maybe we are getting to that point where we can do something about this before it becomes an issue. More with more sad stories about concerning human safety.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find a system in modern civilization that doesn't have some software dependency now involved, right? You think about critical systems in critical infrastructure applications and so on. So I think, for the reality is that lives are on the line here, and I think that's why the U.S. government has taken this shift in their position. I mean, one of the ways that I captured the intent in some of the briefings running up to the release of the new National Cybersecurity Strategy, and some of the briefing around it was, one of the officials said, voluntary measures have proven insufficient, which rings true to me in software systems. And so now we're going to try something different where we're going to make it mandatory. And I think it's appropriate. By the way, I was glad to hear you raise Wendy's name there, because I think she's great and has excellent perspectives on all of this. So that's a great touch point.
Yeah, she was one of my mentors. So that's awesome. Absolutely. That's I remember us having these conversations back 2013, 2014. So yeah, it's cool to see it happening. I mean, this feels quick, compared to other industries. Of course, tech and software moves quickly, but to see the amount of progress we've made in 10 years or just less than 10 years. Talking to Josh Corman and his I Am the Cavalry group, it just feels like it's moved a lot quicker than other industries, having to wait decades. I feel like you talk about the automotive industry, a lot of the safety regulations with tens of thousands of people dying every year still took decades, for seatbelts and things like that to all go in, crumple zones, crash testing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things I think is, again, kind of constructive about the way that this is being put forth in the pretty all-encompassing and broad strategy here is that it's not just a naked assignment of liability, saying, hey, this is your problem now, good luck. There's specific guidance that's being given. And one of the things that's an interesting nuance of the National Cybersecurity Strategy is that it talks about not just this new liability framework and assignment of liability, but it also talks about a safe harbor, the concept of a safe harbor, so that organizations that can demonstrate that they are taking due care, that they're following, the recommended practices, they will receive some relief from, the liability actions that may come if bad incidents happen anyways. And, one of the realities of software is even if you do everything right, sometimes just the complexity piles up and something's going to happen. But I love the fact that there is this explicit path to say, hey, it's not just you're liable and now you have to deal with it. It's like, you're liable, do something about it. And there's specific guidance again here given around what you should be doing. And one of the things that's helpful about all of these recent U.S. policy initiatives is that they're kind of pointing in the same direction. They're using the same definitions. And once again, we see in the context of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, the Secure Software Development Framework being referenced there. So, I like that there's a path to where we need to go. That's part of the overall strategy.
So I love this direction too. I think it's great that we're starting to make some progress, but the skeptical side of me wonders how much of this is going to go the way of GDPR, where certain companies say, well, I'm just going to take the fine because that's a lot easier and cheaper than actually building these checks and balances. What are your thoughts on that? How do you think this could potentially go, especially at the early stages?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the one thing that's helpful in this circumstance or in this context is that the recommended practices, or now the required practices to access that safe harbor from the new liability regime, they're also common sense good things to be doing, right? This is just another reason to undertake these diligent cybersecurity, secure software development practices. So it's not an exercise where the only reward is that you get the gold star or the check the box around complying with the regulations. It's also helpful to your organization because no organization wants to have data breaches, system compromise, et cetera. So in that sense, maybe this is a better, a slightly more aligned set of requirements than some of the privacy things that maybe run a little bit further afield from folks' core business needs.
I hope so.
Me too.
Yeah. So you talked a bit about mechanisms here, and this is something that's still not entirely clear to me. Like how Pillar 3 talks a lot about the organizations that can bear the cost, bearing the cost of this liability shift. So all of a sudden, I'm thinking about, okay, maybe I build a product, and there's plenty of cases where, your terms and conditions, your contract, the company you're paying is clear, but is there liability downstream where maybe between the consumer and the product, whether it's B2B or B2C, that piece of it's pretty clear. But then, like, I've got some open source in here, I've got some commercial libraries built in here. Maybe I'm probably using some cloud services. We've seen tenant breaks in, I think, all three of the major public clouds. We saw OpenAI have a data leak due to a bug in Redis. And then it brings into play the question about insurance and the role that insurance plays here. So what are the mechanisms, I guess, first of all, that are going to protect consumers and enterprises here? Who's going to enforce that bit of it, that initial piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those stakeholders are important. End consumers, enterprises that are consuming. Then there's the software producers, final software assemblers, I think is some of the language that's used there. Another stakeholder I would love to introduce into the conversation, though, are the independent open source maintainers, because they're going to be a really necessary part of the solution here. And one of the really, again,
and sorry if I can just interrupt real
please.
quick. Like, we don't want a chilling effect where they're like, you know what, it's not worth maintaining this anymore if you throw a bunch of requirements on me.
Absolutely. And in some of the parallel efforts that are going on right now that are well intentioned, there have been some concerns there. So an example is in a relatively parallel effort in the EU. There's a proposed language called the EU Cyber Resilience Act. And in that, it also took into account this, it had a discussion around the concept of shifting software cybersecurity liability. But in that case, it was, a plain read of the language would suggest that individual open source maintainers could be personally liable for cybersecurity vulnerabilities in their open source projects that led to harm for a downstream user of that project. That's really concerning. Certainly to the
we've seen
individual
CISOs,
open source maintainers.
We've seen CISOs held personally liable for issues that happen on their watch.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it gets really tangible and immediate when it comes down to individual liability, right? So, there's been a lot of discussion around that. What I think is really either an oversight or a defect in the initial language for the European Cyber Resilience Act. I was glad to see, just to contrast, and probably taking some learnings from that conversation, the National Cybersecurity Strategy. It explicitly calls out that individual open source maintainers should not bear personal responsibility for cybersecurity vulnerabilities in their open source projects, but instead, as you had said a little earlier in this discussion, organizations that are best equipped to deal with this should be where the liability and the responsibility lie. So I was glad to see that there's a explicit appreciation for open source creators and making sure that we don't break a system or really impede the creative energy that comes from open source, the open source community. It's good to see that recognized in the strategy.
Yeah, definitely. So insurance providers, we've seen some concerns about whether or not cybersecurity is even worth providing. We've seen some, obviously, there's still providers out there. A few of them pulled out. A lot of them have kind of changed how they put together policies, how they price policies. The kind of hoops you have to jump through to get a policy. Some of that's changed, but it's still around. And, despite some comments that, maybe it's not tenable, there was a Swiss banker that I think made a comment there. But yeah, how does that fit in here? That's because I know I mentioned the CISOs. They're personally getting insurance to cover them personally for when certain things happen here, in case they're civilly sued, for things that happen in a breach. We saw FTC require Drizzly's CISO, like for the next 20 years, he has FTC requirements hanging over his head. Right. Like he has to have they're kind of vague requirements. They're very, have a full cybersecurity program, limit your collection of data from customers, that kind of thing. But what about these individual maintainers? Like, all of a sudden, do they need to go out and get their own, liability insurance?
Yeah, so my understanding of from reading the National Cybersecurity Strategy is that it's explicitly taking into account that individual independent open source maintainers should not be held liable, should not bear liability for cybersecurity issues in their packages, which is good because it's just kind of unworkable. It would break the ability for individuals to contribute to open source in so many ways if that were the regime that came into effect. But organizations that are consuming open source components from those individual creators and assembling them into products that are then provided to downstream organizations and consumers, they are the explicit focus for this new cybersecurity liability. And so for them, I think there are all these questions around how is the cyber insurance industry going to evolve to for that new set of parties who are going to be bearing the responsibility here. And however that happens, an essential part of this is going to be implementing systems that both allow you to follow the recommended guidance in terms of ensuring that the software that you are incorporating into your product or that you are developing net new as part of your product, that they follow these secure software development framework practices, right? And so, whether that's to provide evidence to your cyber insurance policy provider to, induce them to underwrite your organization, or whether that's evidence that you want to have on hand for the best practices that you've been following in the event that there is a episode where somebody suffers damages because of a cybersecurity breach that your software producing organization was involved in. You're going to want to have that concrete record that provides evidence of what precautions you were taking and what you were able to verify along the way. And a really, really hard part of that question, again, is how do you do that for this software that basically your organization downloaded from GitHub or a community package manager? How do you actually make that? How do you demonstrate that evidence? How do you attest that those practices were followed?
Right. Yeah, and maybe help me out here if there's like a major leg of this kind of conversation that we're leaving out here. But I was going to kind of shift towards talking about the value or lack of value in SBOMs.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's a good place to go next. That's an important part of the conversation is, what is the role of the software bills of material?
Yeah. So I mean, again, to talk about the reason I got so excited about IOXT Alliance is I didn't realize that there were already companies doing certifications, had designed these security labels. And it's fascinating, like the amount of information they have on their website. There's a dispute certification because a lot of these, the vast majority, are self-certified. So you can file a dispute, that this certification isn't deserved or maybe it's not true. And you can also report a vulnerability, which I think is fantastic. And it's got all these details like, are you doing code signing? Are you limiting downgrade attacks? Is there like a single default password or not? And just tons and tons of details on each of these devices. Of course, this is all voluntary at this point, so hopefully we see some regulation around. And it's they say they're focused on consumer now, but a lot of these are prosumer, kind of like small business stuff. There's a lot of stuff here that you would see inside enterprises, but I don't know. I kind of like IoT when talking about SBOMs because I think that's one of those places where it really truly is a black box. It can be tricky to understand what's if Log4j is inside your network devices, for example. Yeah,
for sure. And the other consideration when it comes to SBOM, software bills of material, is that once you have a list of what's inside your application or device. Okay, that's a necessary prerequisite to answering a question. Okay, what are the facts about that, right? Like, what are the attributes that that software has? I mean, it's one thing to have a list of the names of the packages and the versions of the open source packages in the case of open source components, but it's a whole other thing to know, okay, well, what is actually true about those? And this is one place where we've been doing some work at TideLift to contribute to the conversation. In fact, just a couple days ago, we published a proposed specification to contribute an idea in this space. We called ours TACOs, the Trusted Attestation and Compliance for Open Source format. And basically, what this is about is
excellent acronym.
Yeah, it's actually building on some of the heritage.
It is National Burrito Day. It's National Burrito Day, not National Taco Day today, though. But
yeah,
it's close
we're
enough.
Trying to celebrate a tradition here in software supply chain security. There's some predecessors like the Salsa framework from Google. There's a project called Guac. So stay on topic there. But yeah, what it's basically about is, okay, let's go to the next step after building an ingredients list and say, what are the known facts about those ingredients? And specifically, tying this back to the national cybersecurity strategy is how can we get attestations from the folks that made these open source components that they followed these secure development practices at the moment of creation and packaging? And it's a hard question to answer because you can't, without having a way to convey that additional contextual information, there's no way to just grab a package from NPM, a JavaScript package, and inspect it to know, was that developed in a secure environment? Was there two-factor authentication on all of those systems? Was it packaged in a robustly secured environment, et cetera, et cetera? So we have to ask those questions and document those attestations somehow in the chain of custody of that software. And that TACOs is just one potential standard, one proposed standard for how you could capture that information to make those software bills of material more useful for answering the questions at hand.
Well, and there's so many nuances here as well. And I love that you use the NPM example here, because we learned, a couple months back, I think it was a show last year, we talked about, somebody was leveraging NPMs to install, it wasn't malware, it was crypto miners, right? Like, it's always like somebody gets access to like the entire Fortune 500, and that's how creative they get, is let's mine some Monero, when they could do all kinds of other crazy stuff with it. But we found out where you pull in NPM from matters, because the way they had done it is they didn't touch the actual code in the NPM. They did it through the NPM install script, which, before that story came out, I hadn't really played with NPM, so I didn't even realize the install script was a thing. And so you've got this one script that's designed to run on Windows, Linux, whatever platform you install stuff on. And, if you just grab the NPM package directly off of GitHub, you would have been fine. But if you installed it directly from the NPM repository, you would have gotten that malware, because you would have run the install script, which is not actually part of the NPM package, but it is related to it. And the only thing protecting it is that one developer's account that they had no MFA enabled for. And it was shortly after that all of a sudden we see NPM and PyPy and all these repositories starting to require MFA, second factor logins for like the developers of the top 100,000 packages, or I forget what portion of it was.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, we're lucky that most of the attacks have been fairly benign in that sense, that they've been cryptocurrency mining as opposed to information exfiltration attacks. But I don't think we can really count on that being the case in the future, especially once these methods of exploitation become revealed and publicized like this, right? So, but it gets to that point that so much of the prior generation it wasn't called this, but the open source compliance or the prior generation of software supply chain security, I guess, was so myopically focused on the National Vulnerability Database, CVEs. Does the version of the package that I'm using have a known CVE vulnerability in it? Yes or no? That's useful, right? But that's a very minimum standard. It's a necessary but insufficient criteria for declaring victory around the security of your software supply chain. And so I think these new efforts, some of them anchored in government defined practices such as the NIST Secure Software Development Framework, but also others coming from industry consortia and collaboration, like the OpenSSF scorecards project coming from the Open Source Software Security Foundation. I think these are all constructive ways to broaden the aperture here and say, okay, it's more than just detecting known vulnerabilities. That's almost like a virus scanner mentality to security in my view. We have to think about, okay, what are all of the health attributes? What are the process elements that we are ensuring around this software so that we can head off attacks, not just remediate known vulnerabilities.
And to that point, I think one of the criticisms of SBOMs is that they don't go quite far enough. That just understanding what components are in there, isn't quite enough information. Like if you take the SolarWinds case, there's, and I think I've seen some efforts, maybe from what's it called, Cyclone DX, where they have some extensions where they go to, like should this piece of software be just reaching out to updates.solarwinds.com, or I'm seeing mine reach out to soccerfans.ru. Is that normal? So the behaviors of the software. How important do you think it is for us to move beyond just here's the components within the software to, okay, here's also the expected behavior, the network endpoints, you should see this reaching out to as kind of a key example of that behavior.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's another dimension that you can take this in, if you have the sort of virus scanner mentality there, known defects that you're looking for, signatures almost, you can go in the direction of, okay, let's try to document, first, articulate what are the desired secure development practices to be followed, and then have a way to validate that those are being followed, carry through attestations about them being followed. And then a third direction to go that I think you're alluding to is actually looking at the behavior, the discernible behavior, either at runtime or before runtime, by analyzing software artifacts to determine what network endpoints are they going to reach out to, et cetera. Usually, I guess the lesson of computer security is defense in depth. Multiple approaches overlapping in scope will probably be where we arrive here. But I'm just gratified that the conversation is finally advancing beyond a list of virus scanner signatures for your software packages and a list of ingredients. I mean, those are good first steps, but we got to get more sophisticated as the attacks and vulnerability landscape gets more sophisticated.
Right, because when you look at a lot of these attacks, like individually, they look pretty easy to detect and prevent. So yeah, for SolarWinds, all you had to do was know what a normal baseline was for it and enforce that normal baseline. And one of the examples coming out of the Log4Shell are companies that don't just let random software from servers talk out to the internet. That have some kind of default deny outbound from these systems did just fine. Because the callback couldn't make it back out. So you couldn't then talk to that vulnerable component. But yeah, once you add all those up and you consider that you've got tens of thousands of different components and each has their own baseline and each has their their own things, policies that you would have to enforce for it. It starts to look like, okay, maybe I need some kind of software solution to do this for me, or it'd be great if the company could just give me some kind of YAML or some kind of file that has that baseline embedded within it, and like here's what our software should normally do. Anything outside what's defined in this bit of YAML, consider that something to alert on.
Yeah, that's an interesting direction, and I mean that sort of runtime operational containment mechanism is important for end applications that are getting deployed, and that can defend against some attacks. But it's co-equally important for the build environments where those packages are being put together, right? And so that's yet another, I think, reason or rationale for emphasizing, hey, let's look all the way up the chain of custody to where this software is created and make sure that the build environment isn't allowing network traffic from hostile network endpoints that is going to basically find its way into all the downstream applications as well.
All right. Anything else significant from the White House cybersecurity strategy that we haven't touched on that you think is pretty relevant for people to hear about?
I mean, there's one more part that strikes close to home for my personal interests, and also the areas that we're focused on here at Tidelift, which is open source software developers, right? The open source software community. One of the I think undersold aspects of the national cybersecurity strategy is that there's an express declaration in there. I think it's in the 4th section about the fact that the U.S. government wants to get more proactively, directly involved in open source communities, right? It talks about in partnership with the private sector and the open source software community, the U.S. federal government will continue to invest in the development of secure software. Talks about memory safe languages, which I know is probably a
can
great
we call this the Rust
fans out
the
there.
Rust initiative? Is this the Rust initiative?
No, it's again, these are like smart things to be talking about, right? These are, and I think it's just showing through that there are knowledgeable folks on the scene here who are contributing to these policies, to these strategies, and showing up with not just good ideas, modern ideas. I think some of these are, very contemporary, even thinking ahead in a helpful way. But I thought it was great to see the explicit recognition of the open source community as a party that the U.S. government needs to learn how to engage productively with. And it's continuing, right? Even beyond the news of the national cybersecurity strategy, which was a couple of weeks ago. Even more recently, we had the reemergence in the U.S. Senate of the Securing Open Source Software Act that was around last congressional session. It's back. It passed committee. I think it was just last week. So these issues are front and center, and I'm glad to see that the role of open source creators in all of this is not being overlooked. And also, we're not asking, I think it's the policy is protecting these open source maintainers' interests in a helpful way. And it's setting the stage for the rest of us to figure out what are some of these practices that we can design and employ to align the incentives of open source users with open source creators. I just think that's super important.
The only thing that could make this better is if maybe we had some more technologically literate folks in the House and the Senate. But it's progress for sure.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
I'm glad I'm not on the TikTok hearing episode.
Oh my God.
No thanks.
That was painful to watch. Yeah. All right, Donald, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This has been super, super useful, I think.
This was a delight. And if anybody's interested in learning more of our perspective, especially around open source issues arising from the national cybersecurity strategy or these other efforts, we have a kind of helpful section, I think, on the Tidelift homepage. We call it our Open Source Cybersecurity Resource Center. So head over there and we'll help kind of piece together how do these executive orders relate to the OMB orders, to the cybersecurity strategy. We've done our best to highlight how those all connect and how they relate specifically for application development teams building with open source and for maintainers and creators building open source.
And we've got some great links to some Tidelift blog posts that are also in the show notes. And before you dig into all that, order yourself some tacos, guac, and salsa.
Love it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks
we'll be right back
for letting me join.
Absolutely. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.